Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. All right. Folks, we have all of our speakers from today, and anyone has any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask before, this is your opportunity. There is a question. Here we are.
Yes, I have a question. We're having problems with this mic. How's it doing?
Cutting in and out.
Isn't it my hat? Okay. Mr. Stuart, I have a question for you. I know you worked with Malaysia on their currency crisis, and many of the Africa are undergoing similar problems. Have any of the African countries approached you to get your support for some strategic positions against the World Bank or the IMF?
Hello, coming through. The answer to that one is no, but we're still working with Malaysia, and I can't say too much about that just now, but that's still ongoing, and the man who was at the centre of things is still very active on the subject.
Next question.
Yeah, Ben, I asked you. It's not your hand. I'm talking directly into it. Ben, the question about people selling each other short, and I think you're saying with when they make the loan and they have the only way they can make the payments is by shorting someone else. I think could you explain that concept again?
Yes. When we talk about our means of exchange, and we need a means of exchange to provide for ourselves and connecting with a larger economy. At year-end 2005, the banking industry had about $5 trillion in loans outstanding. And after they made those loans, they extended their bank credit in the form of deposits for another $5 trillion. At the end of the year this year, at 10%, for example, there'll be 5.5 trillion due. But there's only $5 trillion there. So what are you going to do? And the person that competes more effectively for those deposits will pay his loan, and the person that competes less effectively won't have enough to pay their loan. But it goes beyond that. And while I understand the concept of savings, if you've got and you can look at the balance sheets of banks. If you've got 30 or 40% of all the money that you've created in a savings account, and the person doesn't need to spend that, but the person who created those deposits with their loans has got to pay their loan back, but it's stuck in a savings account, what do you think is going to happen? So basically, through hoarding, through non-circulation, the people who have borrowed the money to create those deposits for our economy can't get it back. So I don't know.
I have a question there. This is an open question for anybody. Has anyone looked into the concept of what's called a liquidity trap? I read a little bit about Japan, and it appears that they are facing a conundrum. They can't get out of a liquidity trap. They have so much debt, and it's created so much productive capacity. They can't really put it to use, and they can't borrow anymore to create more capacity. That would just be more wasted capacity, and they can't get out of debt. Are we headed for a liquidity trap? Is that something anybody's investigated?
Yeah, this is one of the stories they told, that there's a liquidity trap. In other words, they just print all this money and they haven't had any action on the interest rates. I think it's absolutely unbelievable. I think one of the most talented macroeconomists right now, which is this British young man by the name of, Robert Werner, and he's written a book, and he's an expert in Japan. He's been there now, he's at the University of Southampton. I don't know him personally, but I'd love to. He is an absolute talent. And he's written 2 books, his first one called Princes of the Yen. And he explains that all this maneuver that's been done has been there actually in concert with the American interest to destroy the state-led MITI drive in Japan and transform, an attempt to transform Japan into this new globalized open markets by destroying the barriers that they have. And he describes how this process of economic paralysis has been laying the conditions for that to happen. So I recommend that. It's published by M.E. Sharp. It's called Princes of the Yen. Werner, W-E-R-N-E-R.
His sequel.
The sequel is the macroeconomic principle.
I endorse what our friend has just said, but I caution you that to be cautious about how you interpret what we think comes out of Japan, because what is said is done in Japan is not necessarily what was done, and this is a situation that we're talking about MITI, but it goes back in actual fact to 1865, to the Meiji Restoration, that they have been doing some very, very creative things by Western standards. So please be a little bit cautious and try and look behind what people are reporting is being as said as being done in Japan.
I guess this question is more for Ben than anyone, but James Tobin won a Nobel Prize for his idea that a micro tax on a macro financial transaction would generate enough money to pay off the third world debt or so on. When I apply this, well, first off, about 10 years ago, Canada Parliament actually passed such enabling legislation, and they sitting around waiting for another country to join with them on this. My own idea is that yes, there should be a 2 basis point on an international transaction, 1 basis point on a domestic one if it's got 6 figures involved. And when I calculate this out for just one firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, and their maybe $3 trillion worth of bonds traded per day, I get $1 trillion at the end of the year. But we monitor it in the process if it's independently done, so that you can follow the fraud, you can follow the drug laundering, you can follow terrorist money if it's on the roof. What would it take to get that kind of thinking implemented?
Well, you know, the Tobin tax, which tries to slow down the flow of capital, I guess so if somebody's going to pull a plug and pull all the money out of the country, like in Venezuela, so the country just doesn't collapse, you know, structurally it sounds like a good idea. How to get it passed, I don't know. I mean, you're then subject to all these interests to more scrutiny. And if you made $1 trillion, would you apply it to the debt? I mean, I read about the Tobin tax, and I think it's a great idea. It's a great way to slow this financial fever down.
James, in their advice to Malaysia, simply said foreign exchange controls, much more powerful than a tax. And Tobin tax, I think, might be fine, but not a small tax, because they'll just ignore that. You need either a substantial tax or a shutdown. The whole idea of trading in currencies has to be re-examined. The legitimacy of that idea is wrong. It should potentially be something that you do not trade in, except those who are actually using the currencies. People's lives and businesses, the production of a country depends on currency sometimes. And if you're going to allow foreigners the ability to come in with their vast currency power and dictate to your country, you're going to have trouble. And so this recommendation to the Prime Minister of Malaysia, just stop the trading in currencies, it worked.
One of the questions,
and you don't need to put Tobin's name on this, just call it a tax on transactions. I think you'll get much further, because economists don't like to give up that kind of I think economists would prefer it without the Tobin name on it. Is that correct, Michael, would you say? And Nick, is Nick here? We have 2 economists in the room. Where's Nick? He's gone.
One of the questions I get asked all the time in my consulting business is, Ben, do you have a private investor that can come in and save our farm? And I said, well, if we bring the private investor to save your farm, he'll own it. And given the rates that they charge and the fees that they want, and so when you have capital flows, what are capital flows? They're just in the form of extraction of wealth. There's a debt attached to that money going into that country. So the question is why don't those people have their own processes of exchange? What do they need capital flows for?
This is for David Kelly. Being a financial guy, we know about socially responsible mutual funds that will not invest in the basic tobacco, gambling, etc., military-industrial complex. Do you know of any second or third generation socially responsible funds that will not invest in, say, the media companies, maybe some banks that do a lot of derivatives? I mean, it seems to me that there's a need for that. The closest, by the way, too, that I think meets the AMI's thing, there's a MANA fund that they're not against usury. I mean, it's almost impossible to do it, but they invest in companies that do not have a high degree of debt. And the fund's done very, very well over a number of years, but just your thoughts about that.
I don't know of any company like that. I just hope that there are groups like CalPERS and others, some of the larger pension funds that maybe exert some leadership in that area. I mean, besides POX and Calvert and some of the others. But I don't have a good answer for you. Like so many other questions I'm asked.
One of the things that we have on our agenda at some point is for the AMI to develop a filter, a monetary filter for investment purposes that mutual funds can use. We haven't been able to get into that yet, but it's out there as a possibility where it takes a lot of work. You have to grade corporations by how they are performing monetarily. Are they in the usury business? Banking could be an example. And if you can do something like that, the power of something like that is very dramatic, because a bank or any corporation, it receives its power through its stock price. That's how they can go and get loans. That's how they can finance themselves. If you can knock their stock price down 10, 20, 30%, you're potentially able to change the management of the company.
This question I have is for Professor Guido. It has to do with the Islamic concept of riba, and it's my understanding from what you said, there is kind of like a fine line between the just price of interest charged and the actual, when the actual usury begins. Could you kind of straighten that out for me?
No. What I just said was that in order to understand the notion of the bite, that the interest is a bite, you need to have in your mind, which we all do, is the notion of a just price, a fair price. There's no fine line. It's just you need both. And once you know that stuff ought to be remunerated fairly, then the notion of a bite and of a toll of the interest being a bad thing is automatic.
That Islamic concept of riba, by the way, is very close to what the Christian scholastics said about usury. And it was not so much just a question of taking interest. I think Islam is a bit stronger on that. It was a question of misusing the monetary system. That's essentially what usury meant to them.
Quite right. The Christian view of usury, if you want to go back to a biblical quotation, it says 1 part in 100. That's 1%. But it's quite right about how Muslims view this, that there is this cut-off point. You've got to have the two principles, and any amount of increase on money by using money is haram, it's forbidden.
I have two comments to make to Randy Cook. this presentation. And these are just thoughts I have, and you can maybe set me straight on that. And the first one is tariffs are actually monetary regulations that can bring about equity of trade, eliminating the possibility of too many World Bank loans. That's the first one. And the second one is a statement you made that you don't really need to put money into the economy through printing it through the banks, because the price of farm products through parity is the easiest way to actually put money into circulation in those rural areas.
Yeah, the monetary process of getting money into circulation, paying it into circulation through the loans possible, the parity loans possible to the producers. The question is, how big is the capital pool and who can draw from it to recirculate money? You have at harvest, at delivery of the harvested product at an elevator, for a wheat example, the Commodity Credit Corporation used to sit side by side with the elevator operator, and the CCC representative will offer a loan at 90% parity, and you, the farmer, get to decide whether you want to take that loan or whether you want to sell it to the elevator operator, who will simply make his draw out of the capital pool to pay you. If he wants it, he knows that he has to bid at least as much as the Commodity Credit Corporation is going to offer. So you're just bringing the money back into circulation. The government doesn't have to issue new currency buying power into circulation unless the farmer chooses that loan. Now, the first question was
It had to do with the comment you made about it had to do with the comment you made about tariffs.
Oh, right.
Monetary regulations.
Monetary measures and not trade measures. Yeah, that was all I was trying to get across, is that most folks think of tariffs, in particularly that the popular lore is that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act caused the Great Depression in the United States, which is...
That's in all history classes.
Yes, it is. I understand that. And until you discover the fact that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act didn't go into effect until 1930, that becomes kind of a moot question. It doesn't work. The point is that a tariff, properly operated tariff, is exactly what I said it is. It adjusts the monetary values between partners in a trade internationally. 99.9% of people in the office of the United States Trade Representative don't know that. 99.99% of the people sitting in Congress don't know that.
This question, there's an important aspect to the first question that we should consider, and that is in the American Monetary Act. And this is so important to this type of initiative, because without being able to focus on some particular legislation, everything's in Never Never Land. And in the American Monetary Act, one of the important, really important provisions is for a monetary control board. And that monetary control board will have the power, up within certain limits, of determining monetary policy. And one of the questions is going to be that they will have to consider, and this is not fully defined yet in the Act. We want to define it more and more as we can. But one of the questions, the big questions, is how are they going to decide? What are going to be the criteria? And Randy and I have talked about this. Farming parity could be one mechanism that they look at in deciding, is this functioning the way we want it to function or not? I'm not convinced it could be the only one. I think we need to have a lot more. And I think a case has to be made for that. If you can make a really strong case for that, technically, then that could simplify things. But it's an open question for us.
Can I just finish answering that question? I think the point that Randy, this is really important. We've never really studied cash flows through the economy. And that's because of the characteristics that money has. If money has an investment characteristic, or it has an acquiring wealth characteristics, like the money that we have, and we want to hoard it, but then we don't have a means of exchange. And I think the norm is the first organization to jump forward and say, hey, look, whatever we have, it's got to have the characteristic that it flows through all sectors of the economy, all sectors of humanity, to bring enrichment to everyone. We can't just have it in one place.
Well, see, David brought up the concept of social justice, and the situation with Malaysia there, we had
David brought the concept of social justice up, and if we had the equity of trade, it would seem to me that if it had been going on for 3 years, that the situation in Malaysia probably would not have happened. But you have to realize we're also up against the World Bank when we do these things.
What Stephen was saying about the idea of currency exchanges as a market for speculative activity is absolutely correct, which is what you're saying in other words, is that speculative transactions in national currencies is wrong.
In 1973, I think it was, the IMF faced this question, whether, 72 or 73, I believe, whether they were going to allow what you call free trade in currencies, or whether they were going to act responsibly. And they gave in without a struggle. And it's from that point on that you've got so many problems occurring in terms of the concentration of wealth, and the fact that workers today are not making any more money, making a little less money than they were making in the early 1970s. I think the timing connection is not just a coincidence.
I don't so much have a question as a comment, and it's one of the most simple principles you can imagine. It is mathematically impossible for all nations to be net exporters. So this whole thing about trade is just a tool of capitalist ripoff. And there shouldn't be any kind of trade except equal exchange.
A question more about how money comes into existence through the agriculture. Is that going to be enough money coming into existence with agriculture only, and how would you keep in touch with how much money you need, and what else could you create money with, and what mechanism would it use?
My first response is that agriculture being 70% of the raw material new wealth each year is only that 70%, and so we should also look at the mineral, fisheries, forestry, recycling aspects as well for the adjustment of the proper price. But the money paid into circulation through that production turns over, as Sadi said, according to the state of the arts of production. It turns over and is multiplied in the economy. At the 1947-49 period, the ratio was about 7-to-1 farm income to national income. Gross farm income to national income. Now you can express that either as a velocity of money, in other words, how many times the $1 changes hands before it winds up back at the beginning, or you can look at it as a measure of the quantity of money required each year. Doesn't matter to me, but that is the formula that you need to apply by examining the state of the arts of production. Now, the last time I looked at the actual, what we call the trade turn, the number of dollars, the number of times the dollar turns over between the raw material producer back to the beginning, how many exchanges, hands that has to go through in order to accomplish distribution. It's about 24 instead of 7. I think most of that is connected with what I've noticed in the numbers is that since 1983 to 85, the ratio of national income to actual currency in circulation outside the banks has been dropping, which means that currency purchasing power chits. It's not actual bills or coins in circulation, it is purchasing power. Bank records, it's electronic money. It's not physical things you carry in your wallet. But the number of those purchasing power units of account, as the Federal Reserve calls them, has been growing as a percentage of our national income.
Then you have the, oh, I'm sorry.
This question that you've raised now about how do we get this money into circulation, forgive me, has been rather hijacked by the very nature of our last few speakers into a technicality of how to get them into the hands of the producers. Now, earlier today, somebody questioned this concept of capitalism, and I believe they actually used arrested development. Now, this is a concept which has been discussed in Europe at great length, and I passionately believe that I believe I'm a capitalist. I believe that capitalism has been brought to an absolute stop in its process of development, and we have concentrated on production to the exclusion of the consumption side. The weakness of capitalism is that it does not concentrate. It makes no contribution to how do people consume, and that impinges on the debate about how does this money we're talking about get into circulation. And it comes back to our friend here who talked about Thomas Paine. Now, my belief, to be quite honest, is that beyond what we all talk about investment, a large proportion of this money that we reckon that should come into circulation should go directly into the pockets of the consumer. Now, Tom Paine was probably the first person to talk about the guaranteed income. Now, as an actuary, I'm fascinated to how our friend here views that, because he clearly understands Thomas Paine. But if this created money goes direct into the pockets of the consumer, that will of necessity get to the producer in direct proportion to what the consumer wants to buy.
Exactly, that's true. And in the American Monetary Act, which I will keep coming back to because that's what we're focusing on here, we provide for a dividend, a one-time monetary dividend to every citizen as the system is getting kick-started. But then our viewpoint is that money can be spent directly into circulation by the government without inflationary consequences, as long as it's creating value in the society, whether it's goods or services, that this value then puts a damper on any inflationary problems. For example, we have a provision for farming parity, which is one aspect of what Randy is proposing. We have a provision for an educational expenditure. We are going to be adding a provision when Dr. Banks finishes it for us at this conference for universal health care and for general infrastructure development. The engineers tell us we're $1.6 trillion behind. Bridges, hazardous waste disposal, water systems, roads. It's crazy. You've all driven on a highway at night where you cannot see the dividing line and there's a truck coming from the other direction with big headlights. You've all been there and you don't know if it's going to miss you or not. You want to paint, you want to spend the money on infrastructure and put a bright line in the middle of the road. We're quite confident that these kinds of expenses are going to be needed and will not produce dire effects.
Well, I agree with my friend from the Isle of Jersey here, is that the production and consumption needs to be paid as much attention to as production, absolutely. Absolutely, I agree with you. Yes, that's true. The other thing that I'd like to point out, though, is that the division between producers and consumers is artificial. Every producer is a consumer.
Forgive me, this is a fascinating debate, and if we're not careful, we're going to come to blows. I don't believe that. I don't believe that there is one solution to this. I believe that there's a multiplicity of it, and that actually, I believe, will change over time. Now, when Stephen's quite right, about things about the infrastructure, but what happens when we've done it? What happens when we've done it? How do we get off the treadmill then of saying, well, we've produced all that lot, but we've got to produce a lot more because we've got to pay the new debts that have come into existence, so we've got to produce more, despite the fact that it may well be destroying our planet because we're using up resources that we shouldn't do. I believe passionately in a range of solutions, and I think it would be very wrong of us to nail our colours to any one particular mast.
I think we're getting carried away by hypothesizing. My simple answer to this is, let us get publicly created money into existence, and I think a number of things would flow from that. We needn't go too far into the future. Let us see it happening and take it from there.
Agreed.
I have a question for you about that. I don't understand if you said that. This is about foreign exchange controls, and you said that we shouldn't be trading in foreign exchange, but then you have to get foreign exchange in some way. So how do you tell the difference between speculating in foreign exchange and trading for purposes of?
What's the difference between foreign exchange speculation and foreign exchange for actual use? What is the purpose of the exchange? What is the purpose of currency? Is the currency system set up to help the people of the country who are producing and purchasing and buying and selling goods and whose lives and jobs depend on it? Or is the purpose of the currency is the currency to be allowed to be shifted at the speed of light plus 20 seconds? That's what it takes in the futures market. 20 seconds, they press the button and they're already in touch with in the pit, and now it's done by computer. Are you going to allow speculators at the speed of light to move any amount of currency between countries, all in a grand attempt to get an extra 1/100th of 1% per year or per month on their portfolio, endangering the lives of millions? It seems to be a pretty straightforward question.
So you would eliminate all futures trading, is that right?
Probably much of the futures trading in currencies. Yeah. Now you want to allow some trading for people who are actually using them to offset real trading, real production, real shipping of goods, to protect their positions. But that's a small part of what's going on.
The only real commodities that should ever be traded are those things that rot when they're put out in the sun, or when they fall on your foot they hurt. I mean, those are the commodities that should be traded.
You can get advanced information by allowing us some amount of trading in these things, because some people who see developments ahead of time will signal that through markets. So there's some benefit to be had there. But again, it comes back to this idea. Nothing too much. You allow some of it, but you don't allow it to rule the way we do now. On the theory, it's a form of idealism. The idea is that it's a principle of free trade that you have to allow this. You don't let the world isn't run. It is maybe run that way, but it shouldn't be run that way. You don't have to follow principles in that manner, because they'll lead to trouble.
You have to watch
the effect. And we're capable of doing that. It's not that we're helpless and the way we're told, oh, don't try to create legislation about markets. The market's too strong. It'll just bounce your legislation off. It'll overrule you. And they tell us don't try to figure it out in advance, because you have millions of people participating in the markets, and so the market therefore has all this advanced intelligence from them. It's omniscient, omnipotent, and then they pretend that the market is fair, that the market's beneficial, do the right thing, you get rewarded, misbehave, it's religious really, misbehave and you get punished.
May I say something about speculation? The motives of the speculator are not the same as the motives of people who desire a reliable medium of exchange. The speculators want to deal with the valuable currencies, you know, the yen, the pound,
Taking advantage of your neighbor.
yeah, and the currencies of poor countries they don't want to deal with. Now there was an interesting article that came out in 1945. The author was Haberle. It was about what to do about the European currencies because Europe lay in ruins. And if they had allowed speculators to determine the value of the European currencies, Europe would have never recovered. What had to happen there was they had to say that the European currencies were valuable. They had to artificially raise those values. And that is what facilitated the recovery of Europe. Today, if we want third world countries to develop, we must raise the value of the currencies of those countries. Not let the speculators keep them at an artificially low level.
The equity of trade would take care of that, wouldn't it? The equity of trade, wouldn't that take care of that?
The what?
The concept of the equity of trade, wouldn't that do it?
Well, the GDP per hour as the exchange rate is what would do it. Yeah. Equalize the value of the currencies just like we equalize the length of the meter.
I want Sir James to know that Connie Fogel, who you would have been pictured with this morning, leads a political party in Canada, which I am active in. And at the convention 2 weeks ago came a rather innovative and I think creative suggestion that was resolved that the Bank of Canada should fund the production of an electric car. I think this should be added to Stephen's list of what needs doing and what can be done if you have that kind of prospect. It doesn't solve the global warming thing, but it moves in the right direction. And in Canada, we've been busy subsidizing GM and Ford to hundreds of millions of dollars, and of course they're laying everybody off, and GM's expanding production in India instead. But what do you think, Sir James, about this inspired? Well, I think it's inspired, but do you think this is? What do you think of this suggestion for a central bank to produce an electric vehicle that is eco-friendly?
I think it's a bit odd. I think it's stepping out of the arena of the monetary system. I do think Connie herself performed a great task for us when she and some other people in Canada stopped the MAI treaty. That seems to have stopped stone dead. That was an arrangement whereby the multinationals could almost override the governments of the countries in which they were operating. But I don't follow on this car. Perhaps someone else could give some leads in it.
Well, we were talking about Japan a little bit earlier. Now, had that proposal about developing a particular electric car happened in Japan, and the entrepreneur had gone to MITI and outlined his plans, and if it was thought that this was socially desirable, that the question about whether he had the money to continue to develop it and produce it would not have arisen. MITI would have done it.
There's a balance that we have to find between getting in too particular and being without particulars, because one person suggested to me that it's a mistake to put the education provision, the parity provision, the healthcare provision. It's a mistake to put these things into our legislation because that will raise opposition from some people. But what I have found so far is that it's raising support more than opposition. and it's what gets people really interested. So but I think we do have to be a bit careful about it.
Right now, they're used to spending on everything. There's only one bill that Bush turned down, everything else got signed. So, why can't we get our stuff? They're spending anyhow, what's the difference?
Well, the central bank investing in any particular industrial endeavor seems to me, as Sir James said, usurpation of the popular sovereignty. If there's purchasing power and investment interest among the people who hold that purchasing power, let them make the investments and put the work and bring it forward.
It's getting late, and so the rain has let up for the most part. It's not pouring anymore. So I want to thank all of you for your attention, and speakers, thank you so much for what you've done and staying here. We'll start tomorrow morning on time, because otherwise, and there will be coffee here on time from 8:30. Pardon? No, in this room, yeah, right here. Okay,